He growled at anyone who got too close, until one woman finally gained his trust and discovered a secret no one was ready for. The streets of the city buzzed with the usual chaos. Cars honking, pedestrians rushing, and the sounds of the world spinning fast. Amidst it all, there was a dog. A German shepherd, dirty and thin, wandered through the crowd like a shadow, his eyes scanning every movement around him. His fur was matted, his ribs visible under the dirt and grime. But there was a fire in his gaze, a fire that spoke of loyalty, determination, and something deeper that no one could understand. Take a second to subscribe. It really helps. Thanks. Now, back to the story. He wasn't just wandering aimlessly. No, the dog had a purpose, a mission of sorts. He moved with intention, weaving between the legs of oblivious commuters, as if he knew exactly where he was going, but no one seemed to notice. He'd been here for days, perhaps longer, but no one had bothered to ask why. The city didn't have time for strays. It had no patience for animals that didn't fit in or meet some standard of beauty or usefulness. But the dog didn't care about that. He was surviving, and his most important task, one he wouldn't let go of, was guarding the box. It sat in a corner near the edge of the bustling street, a plain, nondescript cardboard box. He circled it several times, ensuring no one got too close, his body rigid with protective instinct. People glanced at him curiously, but no one dared to approach the box. They saw only a stray dog, nothing more. But the dog knew what was inside, and what was inside mattered more than anything in the world. The dog's posture was a blend of weariness and resolve. His eyes flicked toward anyone who dared come near, a low growl rumbling in his throat. A woman walking by stopped for a moment, startled by the sound, but quickly moved on, oblivious to the significance of what was happening right before her. The dog stood his ground. The cardboard box sat there, unremarkable to the passing crowd, but an anchor to the German shepherd. He paced around it again, his gaze never leaving the box for long. His eyes, once full of distrust and survival, softened as he turned to face it. The cardboard, now frayed at the edges, had been there for days, maybe longer, weathered by rain and wind, yet the dog guarded it like a treasure. His paws pressed against the ground in a protective stance, his body tense, ready to defend if anyone dared get too close. A few pedestrians noticed the dog, but quickly turned away, dismissing him as just another stray. But there was something about his demeanor, a sense of purpose, that made a few people stop in their tracks. The dog's eyes locked on each of them for a brief moment before he growled softly, the sound low and warning, like a promise to anyone who dared disturb the peace of this strange, quiet corner of the city. From a distance, Jenna watched him. She had been passing through the street every morning on her way to work, but today something about the dog caught her attention. She had seen him before, always by the box, always vigilant. She could tell he was no ordinary stray. His posture was too disciplined, too guarded. His eyes told a story, one of loss and survival. Jenna didn't know why, but she felt compelled to approach. She stepped forward slowly, her footsteps careful and deliberate. The dog's head snapped in her direction, and for a moment, she thought he might lunge. But instead, he stood still, his body coiled like a spring, as if waiting to see what she would do next. She stopped a few feet away, hesitating. Her eyes drifted to the box. What could be inside? Why did this dog guard it so fiercely? She reached in her bag and pulled out a small treat, holding it out to the dog. It was a risk, but she felt an odd connection, as if the dog might understand. Slowly, cautiously, he took a step forward. Jenna's heart raced as she held the treat out in her hand, her eyes focused on the German shepherd. The dog hadn't moved yet, but his posture remained tense, like a wire stretched too tight. She took a slow, steady breath, trying to reassure herself that this was the right thing to do. Her hand shook slightly, but she kept the treat steady, palm up, hoping he would see her as something other than a threat. The dog's eyes never left hers, his focus intense, calculating. His stance was firm, like a soldier guarding something sacred. For a moment, Jenna wondered if he would refuse, if he would react the way most strays did, wild, unpredictable, full of fear. But then, Just as her hope began to falter, the dog took a step forward, cautiously, his nose twitching as he sniffed the air around her. Jenna didn't move. Her breath held as the German shepherd circled her, his steps slow and deliberate. He stopped just in front of her, still wary, but no longer growling, his eyes locked on the treat. She could feel the weight of his gaze, a mix of suspicion and curiosity. The air between them seemed charged, like the moment before a storm. With a soft whine, the dog took a tentative step closer, his head low, as if testing her intentions. He sniffed the treat again, and Jenna held her breath, praying that this was the breakthrough she had been waiting for. Slowly, the German shepherd's jaws parted, and with a swift movement, he took the treat from her hand. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. The dog chewed the treat quietly, his eyes still fixed on her, and Jenna let out the breath she hadn't realized she was holding. He hadn't attacked. He hadn't run. For the first time, there was trust. She felt a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, the dog wasn't as lost as he seemed. But then, just as quickly as it began, he backed away, his eyes flickering toward the box, his protective stance returning. It was clear he wasn't ready to let go of whatever was inside. The German shepherd hadn't always been alone. Once long ago, he had a home, a family, and a name. His memories were faded now, like old photographs left in the sun. But in the quiet moments, they resurfaced. He could still hear the laughter of a young girl, the sound of footsteps on the wooden floors, the scent of the woman who had always fed him, her perfume mixing with the smell of fresh-baked bread. He remembered how his tail would wag when his owner, a man named James, came home from work. James had been a kind man, always gentle, always there. The German shepherd had been his loyal companion, his protector, his friend. But that was before everything fell apart. The day James left, the dog was just a puppy, still learning what it meant to trust. At first, he thought James would return. He waited by the door, tail wagging, eyes bright with anticipation. But as the hours turned into days, and then weeks, the dog's hope faded. The door stayed shut. James never came back. When a new family moved in, they didn't want the dog. They were loud, busy people who had no time for a stray animal. They didn't understand his need for affection, his loyalty that had once been so steadfast. They didn't care when he would follow them, hoping for a kind word or a gentle hand. And when they moved away, they left him behind, abandoned in the very yard that had once been his world. The dog learned to survive, to trust no one but himself. He scavenged for food, sought shelter in alleyways, and kept moving, never staying in one place for long. Each new city, each new street was just another reminder that he didn't belong anywhere. But the box, it was different. There was something inside that made him stay, something he couldn't explain but felt deep inside his bones. Something worth protecting, even if it meant facing the painful memories of a life he once had. The German shepherd didn't move from his spot by the cardboard box. Day after day, he stood vigil, his watchful eyes never leaving it for long. He could feel it, the weight of what he was guarding. To anyone else, it was just a box, discarded and ragged. But to him, it was sacred. The cardboard was weathered, torn at the edges from the constant rain, but the dog didn't care. It was the one constant he had left in a world full of uncertainty. His loyalty, his bond, it all centered on that box. People walked by, some giving the dog a curious glance, others avoiding his intense gaze. A few ventured too close, and the dog would bare his teeth, his growl low and threatening. They never stayed long enough to challenge him, too intimidated by the fierce protector guarding what they couldn't understand. He didn't care. He didn't need their approval. This was his job, and he took it seriously. Each time someone passed, his eyes would flick back to the box. He had never let anyone touch it, not since he first found it. He remembered how it had arrived, how it had been dropped in the corner of the street one cold morning, and how, from the first moment he had seen it, he knew it was his responsibility to guard. There was something inside that he couldn't explain, but it called to him like an instinct buried deep within him that he couldn't ignore. A few of the neighborhood children had tried to play nearby, throwing sticks and laughing. The dog watched them carefully, but when one ventured too close, the growl in his throat would rise, warning them to stay away. They never understood why, but they learned to keep their distance. Jenna, the woman who had offered him food before, came by again, her eyes soft with sympathy. She knelt a few feet away, watching him with a quiet understanding, but she didn't approach the box. The dog noticed, and for the first time, he relaxed just a little. Maybe, just maybe, he could be trusted. Jenna crouched low, her hand outstretched, fingers curled slightly in an invitation, not a threat. She watched the German shepherd carefully, noting the subtle shift in his stance. His body was still coiled tight, but there was something different in his eyes, less wild, less wary, as if he were beginning to let go of the constant vigilance that had shaped his life. The dog glanced from her hand to the box, then back to her. His eyes narrowed slightly, studying her, weighing the risk. Jenna stayed still, not moving, not pushing. She spoke softly, her voice steady, though her heart beat a little faster. "I'm not going to take it," she murmured, almost to herself, though she knew the dog could hear her. "I just want to help you." For a long moment, the only sound was the rustling of the wind through the trees and the distant hum of traffic. The dog's gaze flickered between her face and the box, as if debating whether to allow her closer. Jenna could feel the tension in the air, thick like a rope stretched to its breaking point. She held her breath, praying the dog would let her in. Then, slowly, almost imperceptibly, the dog took a step forward. His nose twitched as he sniffed the air between them, the scent of her calm, her intention. He hesitated, but the moment stretched, and something in him seemed to soften, just enough. His ears flicked forward, and he lowered his head, inching closer to her outstretched hand. Jenna's heart skipped a beat as the dog nudged her fingers gently with his nose. It was a tentative gesture, not fully trusting, but willing to try. She didn't move, didn't reach for him. She simply stayed there, palm open, waiting for a heartbeat. She thought he might pull away, but instead, he lingered for a moment longer, the air between them thick with something unspoken. For the first time, the dog allowed her to touch him. Jenna's hand rested gently on his head, her fingers brushing through his matted fur. And in that quiet, fragile instant, something shifted between them, a fragile moment of trust, the first in a long time. Beth pulled the van to a stop a few blocks away, her eyes scanning the scene through the rearview mirror. Behind her, the rest of the rescue team waited in the back, their faces set with determination. They had received the tip about the German shepherd guarding a mysterious box, and now, standing at the edge of the street, the team was ready to move in. Jenna had been a constant observer, quietly watching the dog's behavior, but even she couldn't predict what would happen next. Beth trusted her instincts, and Jenna's sense of the dog's protective nature had been right. There was more to this than just a stray guarding a box. The dog, despite his rough exterior, had shown signs of intelligence, of something deeper than mere survival instincts. But what was he guarding, and why? Beth stepped out of the van first, her movements calm but purposeful. The air was cool, and the hum of the city was far too busy for the quiet urgency that filled her. She motioned for the rest of the team to stay low and follow her. As they approached the corner where the dog stood, the German shepherd's head snapped up, his sharp eyes locking onto their every move. The dog didn't growl, but his stance was firm, and he watched them like a hawk. Beth kept her distance, instinctively understanding that pushing too hard would only make him defensive. She had seen this kind of behavior before, in dogs that had been abandoned or neglected, an animal unsure of the intentions of the humans who approached. She could see the loyalty in the dog's eyes, but it was tinged with fear. Fear of losing whatever he had been protecting for so long. "Easy, everyone," Beth murmured to her team, her voice low and steady. "Let's not rush this." Jenna, standing a little further back, could see the hesitation in the dog's eyes, and it broke her heart. He wasn't just protecting a box. He was protecting a part of himself, something too fragile to let go. Beth's hand slowly reached for a bag of treats, and with a few slow steps forward, she extended them toward the dog. The team held their breath, watching the dog's reaction. Would he let them get closer, Or would this moment of trust break before it had a chance to grow? The dog remained as still as stone, his amber eyes never leaving the rescue team as they gathered at the street corner. He didn't bark, didn't growl, but there was a palpable tension in the air, thick with something unspoken. His body was taut, muscles coiled like a spring ready to snap at any sign of danger. His gaze flickered between the humans, then back to the cardboard box, as if reminding them that no matter how close they came, this was his charge to protect. Jenna watched from a distance, her heart heavy with sympathy. The German shepherd's silent vigilance struck her to the core. He had stood guard over that box for so long, yet no one had come to help him. No one had bothered to see the loyalty in his eyes, the quiet desperation in his actions. But Jenna understood. She had seen it in the way he circled the box, the way he positioned himself to ensure no one could get too close. It wasn't just about guarding something material. It was about guarding a part of himself, something lost that he wasn't ready to let go. As the team remained frozen, unsure of how to proceed, the dog shifted slightly, his gaze still trained on them. The silent watch was all he knew. This was his world now, and he wasn't about to let anyone take it from him. Jenna's eyes met his for a brief moment, and she saw something there, something more than just survival. It was as if the dog was asking for help, but afraid to trust again. Beth, standing a few feet away, knelt down, her hands open and unthreatening. She didn't move closer, not yet, but her voice, when she spoke, was calm, almost soothing. "We're not here to take anything from you," she said, her tone low. "We just want to help." The dog's ears twitched, but he didn't move. He didn't flinch. He simply stood there, locked in a quiet watch that had become his entire existence. The box, the only thing that had kept him grounded, still held its silent secret. The tension in the air seemed to thicken as Beth slowly extended her hand, holding a treat in the palm of her outstretched fingers. The German shepherd eyed the gesture warily, his focus flicking between the treat and her face. His stance hadn't shifted, but there was a softness in his eyes now, a flicker of uncertainty, as though he were finally beginning to question the danger of these people who had been standing before him for what felt like hours. Jenna watched the dog closely, her own heart racing. She knew they were close to something, but she couldn't shake the feeling that it would only take one wrong move to undo everything. The dog had been guarding that box for so long. It wasn't just an object to him. Whatever was inside, it was more than just something he protected. It was his purpose. Beth didn't rush him. She let the dog take in the scent of the treat, letting him process her presence at his pace. Slowly, the dog lowered his head, his eyes never leaving hers as he took a small, cautious step forward. The air was thick with the sound of his soft panting, and Jenna held her breath as the dog took another small step, his body still coiled but no longer on high alert. The moment was fragile, and they all knew it. But then, as if something shifted in the dog, he moved a little closer, his nose brushing gently against Beth's hand. The touch was hesitant, like he was testing the waters, unsure of what would happen next. But Beth didn't pull away. She simply waited, her hand still extended, her voice barely a whisper. "You're safe," she murmured, her words barely audible, but they felt like a promise. "I'm not going to hurt you." For a moment, the world around them seemed to fade. The dog took the treat from her hand, his teeth lightly grazing her fingers. He held it there for a heartbeat, his breath warm against her skin, then stepped back, retreating to his post by the box. The breakthrough was subtle, but it was undeniable. He had let them in, just enough to show them that, despite the years of pain and fear, there was still hope for trust. The sun had started to dip low, casting long shadows across the street as the team stood huddled in quiet discussion. The German shepherd, now sitting near the cardboard box, kept his eyes trained on the group, but his posture had softened. He wasn't growling, no longer bristling with aggression. There was a fragile trust between them, but it was still too early to be certain. Beth glanced toward Jenna, who had been observing the dog for hours. "What do you think?" Beth asked, her voice low, aware of how much was at stake. "Should we open the box?" Jenna hesitated, her eyes flicking to the dog, who watched them with wary patience. She could feel the pull of something, an unspoken bond, a silent plea in the dog's eyes. He was waiting for them to decide, but she couldn't shake the sense that whatever was inside the box wasn't just something physical. It was a part of him, a part of his story. "I don't know," Jenna replied quietly, "but I think he's ready to let go. Just not yet." Beth studied the dog carefully. The trust they had earned was a fragile thing, built on kindness and patience, but there was something deep in her gut that told her the box held answers they weren't ready for. She glanced at her team, each of them silent, the weight of the decision settling over them. They had seen enough abandoned animals in their time, enough heartache to last a lifetime. But this was different. The dog wasn't just guarding a box. He was guarding a piece of his soul, a connection that ran deeper than any of them could understand. If they opened it, would they uncover a truth that would shatter the delicate progress they had made? Beth exhaled, rubbing her temple. "We can't force him," she said, her voice firm but thoughtful. "He's still holding on. Let's give him time." Jenna nodded, and the team quietly agreed. They would respect the dog's silence. But as they backed away, leaving the dog to his watch, the question remained, would they ever be able to open the box? And if they did, would it change everything? The decision was made, but the hesitation still lingered in the air like a heavy fog. The team moved back to their van, the low hum of the engine filling the quiet. Jenna sat with her hands folded in her lap, eyes glued to the rearview mirror as the dog stayed in his place by the box. His posture was stiff again, his eyes never leaving them. Beth sat beside her, the weight of the situation settling in her chest. "We can't leave him like this," she murmured. "He's been guarding that box for so long. Whatever's inside, it's too important for him to just walk away from." Jenna nodded, but her mind was elsewhere. She understood the dog's need to protect, but there was something in his eyes, a mix of exhaustion and quiet pleading, that told her this moment couldn't last forever. They had to know what was inside, but opening the box meant facing the unknown, a mystery that could change everything. Beth took a deep breath and stepped out of the van. She motioned for the team to follow. "We're doing this now. Keep your distance, stay calm. Don't provoke him. We're not here to take anything." They approached the street corner again, moving slowly. The dog was still watching, but now there was a sense of inevitability to his gaze, as if he knew this moment had come. He shifted his weight, the tension in his body palpable. Beth walked ahead of the team, kneeling a few feet away from the dog. Her voice was soft, low, but firm. "We're going to open it now, okay?" she said, more to herself than to the dog. The German Shepherd didn't respond. He didn't growl. He didn't bark, but his eyes were intense, almost resigned. Beth reached for the corner of the box, her fingers trembling slightly. The dog stood, his muscles coiling, ready to spring into action at the slightest movement. As she lifted the flap, the dog let out a low, warning growl. She paused, holding her breath, but she knew they couldn't stop now. The box creaked open, the contents still hidden in shadow, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath. The cardboard lid flapped open with a slow creak, the sound almost unbearable in the tense silence. Beth held her breath, her hand still on the edge of the box. The dog stood rigid, watching her every move with a mixture of fear and fury, his growl low and constant. Jenna felt her heart beat faster as she stepped forward, staying just behind Beth. The German Shepherd hadn't moved, but the air felt thick with anticipation. Every muscle in the dog's body was coiled, ready to spring into action if they went too far. Beth hesitated for a split second, her eyes flicking from the dog to the box, then back again. She knew she couldn't rush this, couldn't make any sudden movements. With careful precision, she lifted the top flap completely, and then she saw it. Inside the box was something small, wrapped in a weathered, tattered blanket. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than an abandoned item, perhaps discarded carelessly, but as the blanket shifted slightly, Beth's breath caught in her throat. Nestled in the center of the box, a tiny, frail puppy lay curled up, its eyes closed, its body trembling. The dog's eyes softened, and his growl faltered. It was clear now, The German Shepherd had been guarding not just an inanimate object, but a living, breathing creature. The bond between them was undeniable. The puppy let out a small, weak whimper, its small body shivering. The blanket it was wrapped in was old, faded, and frayed at the edges. There were small spots of dried blood on the cloth, and a few small tears, likely from the journey the puppy had endured. Jenna knelt down, her hand trembling as she reached toward the puppy. The German Shepherd, still standing guard, didn't move, but his eyes followed every movement she made. He watched as Jenna gently lifted the puppy into her arms, cradling it carefully, as if it was the most precious thing in the world. The dog's eyes flickered between Jenna and the puppy, the deep protective instinct still present. But now, there was something else in his gaze: relief. For the first time, he looked as if he could let go. The secret he had been guarding for so long had been revealed. The air felt lighter now, though the tension hadn't fully dissolved. Beth held the puppy gently in her arms, her gaze flicking from the fragile creature to the German Shepherd. The dog stood nearby, his eyes still watchful, but there was something different in them now. A shift, a subtle understanding that maybe, just maybe, they weren't there to take everything away. Jenna crouched down, keeping her movements slow and non-threatening. The German Shepherd hadn't moved closer, but he didn't retreat either. It was as though he were caught between the desire to protect the puppy and the faint, quiet hope that he could finally trust these humans. Jenna's hand hovered just a few inches from him, her fingers outstretched in a gesture of peace. The dog's eyes locked onto her hand, his gaze unwavering. For a long moment, neither of them moved. The world around them seemed to hold its breath, as if the dog were deciding whether to take the next step. Jenna didn't rush it. She remained still, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm not going to hurt you," she said, her words soft but sincere. "I just want to help." Beth, still holding the puppy, stayed back, letting Jenna take the lead. The dog had accepted her food, and now he seemed to be accepting her presence. But that was different from trust. Trust was earned, slowly, piece by piece. The German Shepherd's ears flicked forward, and he took a hesitant step closer. His eyes never left Jenna's hand, watching it with the intensity of a sentry on guard. He sniffed the air cautiously, his breath steady but cautious. Then, without warning, he lowered his head slightly, bringing it just within reach of her fingers. Jenna's heart raced, but she didn't move, allowing him to decide. Slowly, he nudged her hand, just once, with the tip of his nose. It wasn't much, but it was enough. The silence between them seemed to deepen, and for the first time, Jenna felt a genuine connection, a bond forming that went beyond words. Trust hadn't come all at once, but in that quiet moment, it had begun. The dog was calmer now, no longer tense and on edge, but there was still a wariness in his eyes. Jenna sat back, her fingers gently resting on the German Shepherd's head, trying to convey her reassurance without words. The puppy, now tucked safely in her arms, was asleep, its fragile form still trembling with the remnants of fear. Beth stood a few steps behind, her gaze focused on the dog, understanding that they were on the cusp of something significant. The box, now half open, sat quietly in the street, still holding its secrets. The German Shepherd's protective stance had softened, but he didn't leave it. His gaze was locked onto the box, and for a moment, it felt as if the decision had been made. He wasn't going to stop them. Not anymore. Jenna looked at Beth, nodding. They had come this far. There would be no turning back now. With careful movements, Beth took a step closer to the box. The German Shepherd didn't growl this time, didn't shift defensively. He watched with a mixture of resignation and trust, as though he understood the moment had arrived. Slowly, Beth reached for the edge of the box, her fingers brushing against the cardboard. She looked at the dog one last time, her eyes soft, and then pulled the lid back fully. For a moment, there was only silence, a pregnant pause that seemed to stretch out forever. Inside, there was nothing else, nothing more than the folded blanket, the tiny puppy that had been tucked in so carefully, and a folded piece of paper resting under the cloth. It was the paper that caught their attention. The edges were frayed and worn, The ink faded, but it was still legible. Jenna's breath caught in her throat as she unfolded the note. It was written in hurried, uneven handwriting, the words scrawled with urgency. Keep her safe. They will come for her. They cannot know what she is. The realization hit them all at once. This wasn't just a box of forgotten items. It was a message, a warning, and the dog had known all along. He hadn't just been protecting the puppy. He had been guarding her future. The note felt heavier than it should, its fragile paper crackling in Jenna's hands. She held it up. The words burned into her mind, each syllable now weighing heavily on her heart. Keep her safe. They will come for her. They cannot know what she is. Jenna's fingers trembled as she finished reading, her eyes wide with disbelief. The words didn't just make the situation clearer. They made it infinitely more complicated. The puppy, the dog's devotion to her, it all made sense now, but the reality was terrifying. Someone was coming for her. The puppy wasn't just abandoned. She was a target. Beth moved closer, peering at the note with a look of grim understanding. Her hand was still on the dog's head, offering what comfort she could, but even he seemed to sense the weight of the discovery. His eyes, though softer now, still held the quiet intensity of a protector, of someone who had been keeping watch over something precious, something vulnerable. Jenna glanced back at the dog, who stood vigil by the box. His loyalty was no longer in question. He hadn't just guarded a box, he had guarded a secret. His mission had been clear all along, even if they hadn't understood it. And now that they knew, it felt like they had crossed some unspoken line. The reality of the situation hit Jenna like a wave. This wasn't just about rescuing an abandoned puppy. This was about protecting something far bigger, something far more dangerous. Who would want her? Jenna whispered, her voice barely audible. Beth shook her head, her face hardening. Whoever wrote this, they're not just worried about her survival. They're worried about what she might be, or what she could become. Jenna's gaze drifted to the puppy, still fragile, still shaking in her arms. She pressed it closer to her chest, a silent promise to keep it safe. The discovery had ripped away any remaining illusion of safety. The journey ahead would be more than just about rescue. It would be a fight for the truth and for their lives. And it had just begun. The weight of the discovery settled heavily over them, but there was no time to process it fully. Jenna stood up, holding the puppy close, her heart racing. The urgency in the note's words gnawed at her. They will come for her. It was a chilling message, one that told her everything had changed. The German shepherd remained at her side, his eyes following her every movement, still protective, still loyal. His mission wasn't over. Neither was hers. Beth stood, her jaw set, eyes hardening with resolve. We can't ignore this. Whoever wrote that letter knew what they were talking about. The puppy, she's important. We need to find out why. Jenna nodded, but the fear that had been buried beneath her determination was beginning to rise. What kind of people were they dealing with? Who were they protecting the puppy from? And what do they mean by what she is? The German shepherd, as if sensing the shift in the air, took a step closer to the puppy in Jenna's arms, his gaze unwavering, still ready to protect. Beth looked at him and nodded, understanding the bond. We need to get her somewhere safe, but we also need answers. Jenna's mind was racing. They couldn't afford to waste any more time. Whoever was coming for the puppy, they would not hesitate to do whatever it took to get her. Jenna's protective instincts flared, and the dog's quiet trust bolstered her resolve. Beth moved toward the van, motioning for the team to follow. We'll start by getting the puppy to the shelter. We'll keep her under protection, but we can't hide forever. We need to dig deeper, find out who's behind this, and why they want her so badly. Jenna hesitated for a second, her eyes locking with the German shepherd's. He had already done so much, but she could feel it. He was still with them, still committed to keeping the puppy safe. This is just the beginning, Jenna whispered to herself. But as they loaded into the van, the sense of urgency was clear. They weren't just rescuing a puppy anymore. They were walking into something much darker. And they wouldn't stop until they understood it all. As the van rolled down the street, the sound of its tires humming against the pavement was the only noise that filled the air. Jenna sat in the back, the puppy cradled in her arms, her mind still spinning from the note's words. She glanced at the German shepherd sitting beside her. He hadn't left the puppy's side since the discovery, his protective gaze unwavering. But for the first time, Jenna found herself wondering more about the dog than the mystery that lay before them. Beth had been quiet too, her attention split between the road and the dog, who seemed to be waiting for something. Jenna noticed how the German shepherd seemed to radiate a quiet strength, a calm resilience that was both comforting and sobering. She reached out, her hand gently brushing the top of his head, and he turned to look at her. His eyes were deep, filled with experiences far beyond what he should have endured. "You know," Jenna murmured softly, "I never asked. What's his name?" Beth glanced over, surprised by the question. She had been focused on getting them to safety, but now gave the dog a second look. "You know, I don't think he ever had one. Not since we found him." Jenna's heart tightened. She had seen so much of his pain, his protectiveness, but there was more than that. There was the feeling that this dog, this quiet guardian, deserved more than just being called the dog or the stray. She gently stroked the German shepherd's fur, the movement slow and thoughtful. "He deserves a name," she said, more to herself than to anyone else. Beth nodded, her eyes softening. "I agree. Something strong. Something that means something." Jenna thought for a moment. She'd seen the dog's resolve, his commitment to the puppy, and a word came to her. Something that captured his spirit, his purpose. "How about Max?" she asked, the name feeling right the moment it left her lips. Beth smiled, and for the first time that day, the tension in her shoulders eased just a little. "Max. Yeah, I like that. Max, the dog who had guarded a life far more precious than anyone had realized. Max, the protector." And as Jenna looked into his eyes, she knew it was the perfect name. The first few days in the shelter were quiet, but filled with a sense of urgency that couldn't be ignored. The puppy, whom they had named Daisy, had been placed in a soft, warm bed, her small body wrapped in blankets to help her gain strength. Max, the German shepherd, stayed close, never straying far from her side. His body had finally relaxed a little, but his protective nature was still evident. He watched over Daisy as if she were the most precious thing in the world, never letting anyone get too close without a watchful eye. Jenna spent most of her time sitting next to the two of them, running her hand gently over Max's fur, feeling the tension in his body slowly begin to ease. He had come a long way since that first meeting, when he had been so full of fear and distrust. Now, he accepted the soft strokes, leaning into her touch with a quiet sigh, the last remnants of his wariness slowly fading away. Beth had brought in a vet to check on Daisy, and though the little puppy had been malnourished, dehydrated, and weak, she was making progress. The vet was optimistic that Daisy would pull through, though it would take time. There was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in days, Jenna allowed herself to breathe. Max, however, wasn't yet ready to let go of his guard. He remained close to Daisy, always alert, always watching. But the way his eyes softened when he looked at her, the way he gently licked her ears as if to reassure her, told Jenna everything she needed to know. Max was healing too, just in his own way. The trauma of his past still lingered in the quiet spaces between his breaths, but he was learning to trust again. Jenna smiled as she watched Max nuzzle Daisy's small body, his movements gentle. He had saved her, and now, as the two of them began to heal together, Jenna realized that maybe, just maybe, they could heal too. As the days passed, the bond between Max and Daisy grew stronger, a silent understanding forming between them that no one could explain. Max, though still scarred by the past, had found a purpose again. It was clear now, his mission wasn't just about guarding the box. It had always been about protecting Daisy. She was his to care for, to guide, to love. Daisy, for her part, seemed to know this instinctively. The little puppy had grown more energetic each day, her legs now strong enough to carry her across the room, though she often stumbled in her excitement. But no matter how fast or far she tried to run, Max was always there, a steady presence, guiding her back. He would nudge her gently when she veered too far, or lick her face in reassurance if she seemed unsure. It was a dynamic Jenna couldn't help but watch in awe. There was a quiet rhythm to their relationship. Max was always at Daisy's side, his eyes never far from her. When she would fall asleep in her bed, he would curl up next to her, his body forming a protective shield around her. He would rest his head on the edge of her bed, his chest rising and falling in slow, steady breaths. And Daisy, tiny as she was, would nestle into his side, finding comfort in his presence. Jenna noticed it most during their walks around the shelter, when they would step out into the yard. Daisy, still a little wobbly, would follow Max wherever he went, her little tail wagging furiously. Max never let her too far ahead, always pausing to let Daisy catch up, as if ensuring she was safe every step of the way. When a loud noise would startle her, she would look to Max, her eyes wide, and he would respond with a soft nudge, his presence grounding her. It wasn't just a bond formed out of necessity. It was something deeper, something that transcended words. Max and Daisy weren't just surviving together. They were healing, and in the process, teaching everyone around them what true loyalty and love meant. Jenna sat in the small office, her eyes flicking between the adoption listings on her laptop and the two dogs curled up beside her. Max lay on the floor, his head resting on his paws, while Daisy slept soundly, her tiny body curled against Max's side. It had been weeks since they'd arrived at the shelter, and though they had both made incredible progress, Jenna knew the next step was finding them a home, a permanent place where they could truly start over. It wasn't easy. Jenna had reached out to multiple families, hopeful that someone would come forward who could understand the unique bond between Max and Daisy. It wasn't just about finding a home. It was about finding the right home, a place where they would be safe, loved, and allowed to be themselves. She couldn't bear the thought of separating them. Any luck? Beth's voice pulled her from her thoughts. She stood in the doorway, a soft smile on her face, but there was a sadness in her eyes too. Jenna knew Beth had grown attached to the two dogs just like she had. Jenna sighed and shook her head. Nothing yet. People want one or the other, but not both. It's like no one can understand that they're a package deal. Beth nodded, stepping further into the room. Max is a special dog. And Daisy, she's more than just a puppy. She's got a piece of him inside her. It's clear they're meant to be together. But not everyone gets that. Jenna glanced down at Max, who looked up at her with those steady, watchful eyes. Daisy stirred in her sleep, and Max's gaze softened as he turned his head to nuzzle her. It was clear, in every movement, in every glance, that they were more than just a dog and a puppy. They were family. I just want them to be happy, Jenna whispered, her voice thick with emotion. They deserve to be loved the way they love each other. Beth smiled softly. They will. You'll find a right family for them. They're meant to be together, and the right person will see that. Jenna nodded, though the weight of uncertainty still lingered. She only hoped that the right family was out there, somewhere, waiting for Max and Daisy to complete them. It had been a long, uncertain wait, but when the couple walked into the shelter that afternoon, Jenna knew instantly that they were the ones. The man, tall with a warm smile, and the woman, kind eyes softened with empathy, seemed to radiate the quiet confidence of people who understood what it meant to commit to something, someone, completely. They had come in response to Jenna's ad. They were looking for a companion, someone who needed them as much as they needed someone to love. But when they saw Max and Daisy, it was clear to Jenna that the bond between the two was undeniable, and they were willing to accept both. "We saw your post about the pair," the man, whose name was Tom, said as he approached. He crouched slowly, offering his hand to Max. The German shepherd's eyes flickered between the couple, and for a moment, Jenna held her breath. But to her relief, Max moved forward, his tail giving a tentative wag. It wasn't an immediate leap of trust, but it was progress, one more step toward what they both needed. Daisy, still small and unsure, was lifted gently into the woman's arms. "Oh, she's precious," the woman Linda cooed softly. Daisy wiggled in her embrace, her tiny tail twitching with curiosity. She wasn't quite used to being held, but the woman's soft touch and the steady warmth of her voice seemed to calm her. Jenna watched from a distance, her heart swelling with hope and relief. The connection between Max, Daisy, and the couple was immediate, but there was something more in the air, something unspoken, a knowing that this wasn't just a simple adoption. It was the beginning of a new chapter for all of them. "You're both so wonderful," Linda said softly, glancing at Tom, who nodded in agreement. "We've been looking for a pair like them. We have a large yard and plenty of space to let them run. They'll be loved, I promise." Jenna smiled through the lump in her throat. It wasn't easy to let go, but as she watched Max and Daisy move closer to their new family, she knew in her heart that they were exactly where they were meant to be. A family had been found, and with it, a new beginning for Max and Daisy. Max and Daisy's new home was everything they could have hoped for, and more. The house sat on a quiet street at the edge of a small town, surrounded by tall trees and a large, fenced-in yard. The moment they arrived, the smell of fresh grass and earth filled the air, and the soft hum of a nearby stream added to the peaceful atmosphere. It was the kind of place where one could feel the weight of the world lift, a place where the hustle and bustle of the city faded away, replaced by the soothing sounds of nature. Tom and Linda led Max and Daisy into the yard, their excitement palpable as they opened the gate. The dogs hesitated at first, taking in the wide, open space in front of them. Max's eyes scanned the area, always vigilant, but the scent of freedom, the promise of safety, seemed to ease his tension. Slowly, he took a step forward and then another, his tail wagging cautiously. Daisy followed close behind, her little legs carrying her across the yard in an excited, wobbly trot. Linda crouched down, her arms open wide, inviting both dogs to come closer. Max, ever the protector, stood by Daisy, but this time there was no hesitation. He moved forward, his step sure, and with one soft nudge of his nose, he made his way to Linda's side. Daisy, too, found her way into her new mother's embrace, her small body wriggling with joy. "This is their new home," Tom said, his voice filled with pride as he watched them. "This is where they belong." Jenna stood at the edge of the yard, her eyes misting over. The pang of goodbye still hurt, but the sight before her, Max relaxed and happy, Daisy exploring her new world, told her everything she needed to know. The dogs were home. They weren't just surviving anymore. They were thriving. And that, in the end, was all she had ever wanted for them. As the sun set behind the house, Max lay in the grass beside Daisy, both of them finally at peace. They were no longer guarding a box. They were home, together at last. The first few weeks in their new home had been nothing short of transformative. Max and Daisy had quickly adapted to the peaceful rhythm of their new life. Their days filled with long walks in the woods, playtime in the yard, and quiet evenings curled up together on the living room rug. Tom and Linda had given them the love and security they'd both craved, and in return, Max and Daisy had blossomed, shedding the remnants of fear and uncertainty that had once held them captive. Max, though still cautious, had begun to relax in ways Jenna hadn't thought possible. He no longer spent his days on edge, guarding every corner of the yard or watching every movement with suspicion. Instead, he found joy in simple things. Running alongside Tom as they jogged down the trail, lying in the sun with Daisy, and even curling up in front of the fireplace with his head resting on Linda's lap. It was a peace he hadn't known in years. Daisy, too, had transformed. The once timid puppy now bounded across the yard with abandon, her small legs carrying her swiftly as she chased after butterflies or pounced on the wind-blown leaves. She no longer cowered at loud noises or shrank away from new experiences. She trusted her new family completely, and in return, they gave her a world full of safety and adventure. Jenna visited them frequently, each time bringing a mix of emotions. It was bittersweet to see them so happy, so free, knowing she had played a part in getting them to this point, but also feeling the sting of loss. She had known them in their darkest moments, and now she was witnessing their bright new beginning. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned shades of orange and pink, Max and Daisy stood together at the fence, their eyes trained on Jenna. She smiled a soft, knowing smile. She didn't need to say anything. The look in their eyes told her everything she needed to know. They were home, they were whole, and they had a fresh start, one full of love, safety, and the promise of tomorrow. As the months passed, Daisy grew stronger, both physically and emotionally. What had started as a small, fragile puppy wrapped in a tattered blanket had transformed into a lively, playful young dog with a fierce spirit and an unshakable bond with Max. The once timid creature who had clung to him for safety now ran beside him with the confidence of a dog who had known only love and security. Daisy's days were filled with energy and joy. She was a whirlwind of activity, her tiny legs now able to keep up with Max as they ran through the yard. The two dogs spent hours together, chasing after tennis balls, racing through the grass, or simply lounging in the sun, their heads resting on the cool earth. Daisy often mimicked Max's every move, learning from him, following his lead as he guided her through the world with patience and care. Though she had grown in size, Daisy's playful nature hadn't changed. She would tug at Max's tail to get his attention, nipping at his ears or darting under his legs to catch him off guard. Max, though older and more composed, indulged her, rolling onto his back with a soft growl, inviting her to wrestle. He had become her protector, her teacher, and her best friend, and Daisy had come to rely on him for everything, from learning how to navigate their world to finding comfort during thunderstorms. Linda and Tom watched with pride as Daisy blossomed, often remarking on how much she had changed since they first brought her home. She was no longer the fragile puppy they had rescued. She was strong, vibrant, and full of life. Yet, through all of her growth, she never strayed far from Max. Their connection remained unbroken, their bond deepened by the time they had spent together, learning and healing. Jenna visited one afternoon, standing quietly by the fence as Max and Daisy ran in circles, their joy infectious. Daisy, now fully grown, stopped for a moment and looked at her, her eyes wide and bright. For a moment, there was a flash of the little puppy she had once been, but it was fleeting. Daisy was no longer that fragile creature. She was thriving, and Max, her protector, her companion, was always by her side, as he had been from the very beginning. The sun was setting over the yard, casting a warm, golden light across the field where Max and Daisy played. The two of them were running side by side, a perfect pair, one older and steady, the other young and full of life. Max's movements were slower now, the years of guarding and running having taken their toll, but Daisy never left his side, always watching over him as much as he had once protected her. Tom and Linda sat on the porch, watching the dogs with smiles on their faces. Their lives had changed the moment Max and Daisy had entered them. They brought more than just companionship into their home. They had brought healing, love, and an unspoken understanding of what it meant to be loyal, to be a family. Jenna stood nearby, her heart swelling with emotion as she watched the two dogs run together. She had known their journey, had witnessed their struggles and their growth, and now, standing at the edge of this new chapter, she knew the bond between them would last a lifetime. The little puppy she had once held in her arms was no longer fragile or afraid. Daisy was strong, confident, and more than ready for whatever life had in store. But she had never once strayed far from Max, the dog who had saved her, who had shown her the meaning of love without words. Max, too, had found peace. His body, though older and slower, no longer carried the burden of the past. He was content, and in Daisy's joyful leaps and playful runs, he found his own sense of purpose fulfilled. He had given everything for her, and in return, she had given him something he had never known before, a place to call home, a family, and love. As the day faded into night, Jenna took a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the moment fill her chest. She wasn't just leaving behind a story of rescue. She was leaving behind a legacy of love, one that would carry on through Max and Daisy, through the home they had found and the family that had been built in their care. It was a love that would never fade,